So here we go. You ready for it?
In a world where recording and mixing budgets are no longer as extravagant as they once were, due to the ever-increasing expansion of production into the digital domain, musicians, producers and engineers are now finding themselves working more and more in a home studio type environment. The digital revolution has forced many large-scale studios to shut down or turn themselves into teaching facilities, and with that, many artists and engineers are missing out on the opportunity or afforded the budget to experience great analog gear. That is, until something like the Szikla Prodigal Channel Strip comes along to help home producers utilize the best attributes of both the digital and analog domains. The Prodigal consists of a high-end analog preamp, EQ, De-Esser, compressor and monitoring station all in one box, packaged beautifully with the engineer or musician working from home in mind and, importantly, with no compromise in quality. Viewers would recall that when I interviewed producer-engineer David Nicholas, he spoke about developing this actual channel strip with his friend Andy Szikla. Now that The Prodigal has finally been released after years of R&D development, I've been given the opportunity to play around with the unit these past 2 weeks, and I must say that I am thoroughly impressed by it. It comes as no surprise to learn that in addition to Andy Szikla having a background in electrical engineering, he has an extensive experience with TV broadcast, live sound, and is himself a musician. Andy tells me that the Prodigal started out as a sophisticated headphone amplifier that was a custom build for some close friends, but it very soon changed into the feature pack beast that it is today. Thanks in part due to Andy's collaboration with David Nicholas. The Prodigal has been in development on and off since 2008 and just kept coming back to Andy as a project he'd always intended to finish, with more and more features added as time went on. And as Andy put it to me, the prodigal son eventually returned and he was able to complete it. The Prodigal meets the most challenging technical and artistic criteria, whilst also being scalable for use in many different situations, not only in the home studio environment, but also location recording, live sound, and of course the professional recording studio. The unit is not intended to replace your DAW interface, as it's an entirely analog unit, but instead works in concert with your existing hardware, converting even a meager 2-in, 2-out interface into a hybrid workstation. Each unit houses 2200 components, takes a week to build, including 7 hours of testing and alignment before the Prodigal is ready to ship. It is not only gorgeous to look at, but is incredibly well made and puts a high-end recording chain neatly within a 3-rack unit enclosure. The Prodigal features solid-state componentry with hand-matched discrete transistor preamps which offer a very low noise floor when recording at high gain. The unit notably lacks that distinct hum which is present in most other analog equipment, and it's apparent that much of the design work has centered on making the Prodigal sound the best it possibly can to provide a very clean path for recording and/or mix processing. Let's look at some of the features and then I'll take you through how it sounds in comparison to a typical interface preamp. It's worth mentioning that I am using the Prodigal as the recording chain in this video, so you'll no doubt hear a difference to my usual work. Let's start with the ins and outs and work our way back to the middle. Inputs include both balanced and unbalanced mic or line connections, suitable for recording instruments or receiving auxiliary level equipment, such as additional DAW outputs to enable the Prodigal's use as hardware inserts within your software. There are a maximum of 2 inputs at a time, with 4 possible paths into the channel strip via the 2 XLR inputs on the back or the TRS inputs on the front. You can switch between these on the front of the unit via the input selector, which also enables switching between a mic or line level input type. Your input selection is automatically reflected via the input metering on the front of the Prodigal, and this provides simultaneous peak and VU readouts. The unit has plenty of input gain with an adjustable 30 decibels worth at the input stage, a maximum of 76 dB of gain for microphones, making the Prodigal suitable for ribbon microphones too. There is also a 20 dB pad for inputs not requiring as much gain, which sets up the gain structure nicely for any downstream processing within the strip. Phantom power and polarity reverse switches are also included. The Prodigal can receive the 1 and 2 outputs of your interface at line level to then feed them directly into either of the 2 playback left and right inputs on the back of the Prodigal. You can then connect 2 sets of monitors to return via the 2 studio monitor out paths on the back of the Prodigal, with the possibility to switch between those 2 sets using the buttons on the front of the unit, which is very handy. These playback inputs include a pad switch to drop down from +4 dBu Pro line level gear to -10 dBV for domestic gear, ensuring that playback is appropriate for your particular monitoring setup. If you want to balance your 2 monitor sets against each other, then adjustments are additionally available on the back of the Prodigal. There are also 2 high-quality headphone outs, a 6.5mm jack or 1/4 inch, and a 3.5mm jack, with a volume pot, ideal as a third mix reference, for location recording or for situations that dictate the need to monitor in the same room as a live instrument. As with the input selector, we also have the ability to switch the output meters on the front of the unit to monitor the left-right outputs of the channel strip, including the gain reduction occurring within the De-Esser or compressor for each channel. If you'd like to hear what's happening within the Prodigal itself before it returns to your door, a dedicated monitoring path can be independently switched in and volume matched to your playback monitoring path for either comparison purposes or for latency-free recording. This means you simply mute the output of the instrument you are recording within your door and only listen to the song via the playback section, whilst hearing the vocal or whatever instrument you're recording in real time through the Prodigal section. This is a great feature as it removes the issue of the performer not being able to perform with the track and simultaneously hear themselves in the correct context with the song. Both the Prodigal and the playback monitoring sections of the unit can be summed to mono, meaning that you can check your mono compatibility very quickly during mixing at the flick of a button. But the mono switch also means that during tracking, you can center an instrument that is running down one side of the channel strip so that both earphones receive the same information. Alternatively, you can keep the output split as stereo signal and run a single recording channel through one side only. This, of course, would be suitable for performers who prefer to record with just the one headphone on. Additionally, there is a rotary switch in the playback section that allows for switching between 3 different monitoring paths. Number 1 will generally be your playback inputs 1 and 2 from your DAW. Number 2 is for a second set of inputs and could be from a CD player, tape player, or other input device. Number 3 corresponds to the 3.5mm jack in the playback section and is designed to receive a signal from a headphone out of your mobile device or portable music player. This setting means that if you're working with a client who has a reference song on their iPhone, you can easily plug it in to the Prodigal to reference against it, circumventing the need to import the song directly into your session. Moving on to the inner workings of the unit. The pre-section and EQ is reminiscent of the classic Neve 1073 module, but I think that the Prodigal has enough uniqueness to exist within its own niche. The unit comes with built-in high and low pass filters for each channel, which are great for tone shaping or cleaning up a signal at the beginning of the recording chain. The high pass filter has a very gentle roll-off in the low end up to 200 Hz and slightly above. The low pass filter appears to have a slightly steeper roll-off than the high pass filter and cuts down to 2K or slightly below. The sweepable one-band EQ ranges 100 Hz up to 10 kHz, features non-symmetrical boosts and cuts, but with a bandwidth all through the spectrum of about 1 octave at ±3 decibels, allowing for more focused EQ work. The character of the boosts are best described as quite smooth and rounded, while the cuts feature a more pointed center frequency and focus down to a finer point as the cut is made. This makes the Prodigal EQ very musical due to its broader all-encompassing boosts and slightly less inclusive, narrower cuts. The air and demud buttons are also an interesting addition to the Prodigal. The demud applies a fixed bell-shaped EQ cut at around 300 Hz by 3 decibels, which has been included to help clean up any muddiness that can often build up in some smaller room recording situations or in general throughout a mixing session. The air button applies a wide bell-shaped boost at 24 kHz, resulting in a plus 10 dB boost at 20 kHz, curving down to 0 dB at 9 kHz. This adds a pristine top-end shine to the signal and sounds especially nice on lead vocals. But despite being grouped in with the demud button, the air actually comes at the end of the signal processing chain so as to avoid any unnecessary triggering of the dynamics section. I found that by combining both the low-pass filter and the air boost, I was able to get a nice gradual incline down to a shelf from 2 kHz and upwards, and that the two filters were very well matched to perform the combination boosting and cutting in this area. The De-Esser is a FET type of De-Esser and appears to work similarly to a DBX 902. During quieter passages, the unit can be heard to de-ess less aggressively to accommodate the drop in level and to keep the voice sounding natural. It is essentially a high-frequency roll-off set by the Hertz dial, and the amount of de-essing is controlled by the S dial. It works really great, and having the ability to de-ess a singer during tracking is definitely nice to have, especially if it helps to craft the sound before it hits your door. Both the Compressor and De-Esser have limit LED lights included in their design, which act as a quick reference guide for the amount of gain reduction happening, with the light indicating the amount of gain reduction as determined by its intensity. Moving on to the Compressor, it is also of a FET variety, which brings back memories of some of the hardware 1176s I've used in commercial studios. However, this compressor appears to be less crunchy and can afford to be driven very hard without losing warmth or transparency, most likely because of its soft knee design. The compressor can be very fast and offers a variable ratio control of up to 20:1, with attack times as slow as 2.5 milliseconds and as fast as 5 microseconds, which can grab a hold of a 20 kHz sine wave halfway up the leading edge of the cycle, making it a great compressor for limiting fast transient material. The release ranges in speed from 50 milliseconds up to 1.35 seconds and shows very little distortion when set to the fastest setting. To drive the compressor, the Prodigal has a supplementary input gain of 25 decibels available, with the compression itself producing a maximum gain reduction of 22 decibels. The threshold for the compressor is interlinked with the ratio control, similar to the URI 1176. As the ratio is increased, the threshold becomes more relaxed, meaning that the higher ratios will result in the compressor acting on more of the peak information until such time that you bring the input level up to meet the higher fixed threshold. There is also a link button for the left and right channel compressors accessible from the left channel section. Independent input, attack, compress, and release settings can be had on either side. However, when the link button is in, the compressor will react to the side that is being driven into the compression first and by the greatest amount. Gain reduction is then applied equally to both sides, and similarly, whichever side is the first to release from the compression will then dictate the linked release time for both sides. I found the physical setup process really straightforward, but I did run into some issues with the Focusrite mixer application for my interface, as the signal it sends out comes before Pro Tools. So instead of having a delay to the signal, as is the case with most hardware inserts, it was actually coming 186 samples before Pro Tools when I recorded it back in. Just to be clear, this was an interface quirk and not an issue with the Prodigal itself. Once I had it figured out, it was smooth sailing, as all I needed to do was delay the signal being sent out to the Prodigal so that I can have it return at the same time. Having a hardware delay set up correctly with your DAW is particularly important if you want to use it for parallel processing, as any minor delay will cause smearing of the sound due to the phase cancellations happening against the original signal. Here's how I've set it up for use with my Focusrite Scarlett 6i6 interface and 2 sets of monitors. Inside of Pro Tools, I have the signal being sent out of outputs 3 and 4 to the Prodigal after a short sample delay using the Time Adjuster plugin, with monitoring happening through my Scarlett Mixer application to prevent feedback. As a side note, when you assign specifically numbered outputs within Pro Tools, for example outputs 3 and 4, as hardware inserts, then Pro Tools automatically assigns the corresponding numbered inputs, for example inputs 3 and 4, as the return for that hardware device. So in my setup, the signal is returned via inputs 3 and 4 and automatically routed back into the same channel as though the Prodigal were simply a plugin. If I want to use the mic inputs on the Prodigal, as I am for this voiceover, all I have to do is simply select inputs 3 or 4 to correlate with whichever channel I'm recording on. Once that was set up and working as intended, I was able to work on the sound in real time, and when I was happy I could then print back into Pro Tools to another audio track. I also made a document of the Prodigal settings just in case I needed to recall those exact settings for any reason. Once those things are done and recorded, you're ready to move on and to use the Prodigal for processing elsewhere. So how does it sound? I've gathered examples from the free multi-track library on Mike Senior's website.
I keep waiting for you to walk in the room. I keep saying, I can't believe this is true. I keep waiting for you to walk in the room. I keep saying, I can't believe this is true.
So as promised, I'm recording this through my Focusrite 6i6 without the Prodigal. So they were just a few examples there. But in this next example, I want to take you through an entire mix where I've actually gone through and processed everything individually through the Prodigal. And we'll do an A/B comparison between that and the original tracks, which have been completely untreated. And then we'll put the Prodigal on as an insert over the mix bus, and we'll see how that sounds.
So here we go. You ready for it? She was the very first motherfucker on electric guitar. She taught the king how to shake and mold. She even taught the king how to shake and mold. Even taught the king. Little dollar, you really got me living again. Got me hanging, never beat you. mixed up world. Crazy, mixed up world. You are the queen. Come on. Memphis minute girl.
Alright, so aside from the mix bus compression, which you can obviously do after you've used a few plugins or something, what I really wanted to do was see what is the cumulative effect of the Prodigal Channel Strip on everything. I think it sounds pretty good with just the individual processing done on each channel, and I think if you started a mix from that spot, you'd be excited about mixing and you'd want to get in there because it's already got a vibe. Whereas the unprocessed, there's a lot of frequencies in there that I'm hearing that I'm not liking, and I think the Prodigal does a really good job of smoothing a lot of that top end stuff that's really nasty, and I really love the way the bass feels. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you back to the Prodigal voiceover. So what did I think of the Prodigal Channel Strip? I've already touched on some of what I like. I'll start with the detracting points and then the good. Admittedly, almost all of the bad points are associated with it being analog gear. The Prodigal does require calibration to set the correct gain structure, something you never have to do with a plugin. I found that it was important to run tone through the unit and make adjustments to the gain on either side of the strip to ensure that I was getting an accurate stereo image. This must be done prior to printing a mix back into your DAW and can be a little tedious. However, this is the price you pay when using analog hardware. Faster than real-time bounces are also out of the question for obvious reasons, but I feel you are rewarded for taking that extra time. I did encounter some very slight drift between the gains on each channel during the calibration process. Again, this is an issue specific to analog hardware processing and not something that in any way affected what I was able to do with the unit. Being a plugin junkie, I really missed the ability to link each side of the channel strip at the press of a button for all the processing, not just the compressors, as it's fairly easy to forget that you haven't matched your EQ settings across both channels when using it for stereo processing. That's likely an impossible task and more a reflection of how spoilt we are in the digital realm. I thought that the operating ranges of all the knobs were sufficient, but I did feel that the slow setting for the attack on the compressor would perhaps benefit from being made a little slower than the current 2.5 milliseconds, maybe something in the order of 10 milliseconds or more to let slightly longer transients through. Once again, not a big criticism, as the gentle knee design of the compressor has shown itself to be very musical in shaping the front end of the sound. I just love how the unit feels. It's strong and it feels well made. All of the controls allow you to dial in accurately the sound you want to hear, and I like the fact that it also puts an emphasis back on using your ears for decision making without getting bogged down in the finer details. I think the Prodigal does a great job of everything it's designed to do and integrates extremely easily with a typical interface. The sound I cannot really describe except to say that I felt it gave me an instant vibe. It has a life to it, a kind of randomness or non-linear quality which I like, as it's organic and very musical sounding. From the lows all the way up to the highs, it really excels, and I especially noticed a marked difference in how it made the low end feel. I've used many plugins, but I think I would struggle to recreate what the Prodigal does to a sound in the digital realm. The bass had this solidity and weight to it, but also a tightness that I've heard on other records, which I haven't been able to achieve with plugins alone. I'm going to have a hard time handing the unit back, to be honest. What digital and analog do individually, they do very well, and the logical step to take is to incorporate the advantages of each into your workflow. In the ever-increasing home studio market, I think the Szikla Prodigal is the first of its kind to really package something of great quality and value and functionality that can take home recordings and mixes to a whole new level of professionalism and sophistication. Until next time, happy mixing. If If you have any questions, comments or ideas for new video tutorials, please email me at yamahadrums2009@hotmail.com. You can also check out my personal website, sblmixing.com. And please subscribe to be kept informed of future video releases.